Hi, welcome to Miss Richardson's 5-Minute Lectures. This information is U.S. Notes 1.23, Teddy Roosevelt's Imperialism. It aligns with the fourth section of your study guide. Now, make sure that you're controlling the notes and using your study guide to take those notes. Let's go ahead and get started. As you can tell from the title, these notes are also about Teddy Roosevelt. Only instead of looking at the different ways he was involved in changing American society, now I'll tell you about the ways he was involved in the rest of the world, or his foreign policy. And yes, he was very involved in the rest of the world. Between what he did in the U.S. and what he did in his foreign policy, I'm not sure that man slept for the 7 years he was president. Now, most of Roosevelt's foreign policies actually fall under the policy description of the Big Stick policy. This name comes from a quote that Roosevelt adopted from an African tribe. The tribal belief translated roughly to speak softly and carry a big stick. This is what Roosevelt did in his dealings with other countries. Basically, it means that a person should be polite and first try to come to a peaceful solution when a problem arises. If a peaceful solution is not possible, then out comes the big stick, or in the case of America, the military, and that person uses force to resolve the issue if necessary. Roosevelt felt that fearing force was not good. There were times when it was necessary for the success of a country, specifically the U.S. One area of Roosevelt's foreign policy where this can be seen is in the building of the Panama Canal. France had begun construction of the canal, but was unable to complete it due to economics and yellow fever. They sold their building rights to the U.S. for $40 million in 1902. At the time, Panama was actually controlled by Colombia, and the Colombians did not want the U.S. to build the canal. It was not that the Colombians did not like the U.S., it was that the deal with the French had an expiration date. Colombia wanted that to expire and then sell the rights to the highest bidder. It could have been the U.S. or someone else. When Colombia refused to allow the American deal with France, Roosevelt knew he had to use his big stick. Roosevelt knew the Panamanians were unhappy with Colombian rule and that there were rebels gaining strength in a bid for independence from Colombia. He let the Panamanians know that the U.S. would recognize them as a country and not stop their rebellion if they would then allow us to build and control the canal through the Isthmus of Panama. The rebel leaders agreed. In November of 1903, the rebels revolted and the U.S. used their ships to block Colombian troops from landing and engaging against the rebels. Just a few days later, Panama declared independence and the U.S. recognized them as a new nation. Just 3 days after becoming a new nation, Panama signed a treaty with the U.S., giving them the right to build the Panama Canal and to control it for an indefinite amount of time. The U.S. began construction almost immediately and completed the canal in 1914. The U.S. gave control of the canal to Panama in 1999, 89 years after formally taking control of the canal. So this is just one example of Roosevelt's interventionist actions. He believed that often America needed to intervene or get involved in other areas of the world for the good of the U.S. That was essentially his big stick policy and interventionism. Another example of this is the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. A corollary is an addition to a document. The Monroe Doctrine stated that the U.S. would actively oppose any efforts by an outside power to take control of any nations in the Western Hemisphere. Basically, this means that if a European power wanted to take over an area in Central or South America, the U.S. would actually oppose them and support the Central or South American country. In 1904, Roosevelt added that the U.S. would not use this as a reason for them to take over new lands. This ensured places like Panama that the U.S. wanted to help and influence them, but not to control them. This corollary helped create positive and welcoming relationships between the U.S. and Central and South American countries. It also kept European powers away from these areas, allowing the U.S. more freedom to influence governments and economies in ways that benefited America. So this is the end of US Notes 1.23. Hopefully you learned something and bring any questions you have to class tomorrow.